So now I'm delighted to chat with Joachim Gassen from Humboldt University and Bianca Beyer from Aalto University, who are going to talk about their quite exciting work on the effect of carbon footprint information on consumer choice. Over to you, Joachim.
Yeah, Peter, thanks for having us. And we are really excited also to be a part of this wonderful conference. So what we are talking about is scope of work with Rico Schaschel, Simone Euler, Ann-Christine Groskopf, and Thorsten Zellhorn. We are all part of the Accounting for Transparency network. And so we came across this question as accountants because we sensed that there was a information problem here. So this is prior work published in Nature Climate Change that looks at the assessed level of carbon footprint that food and electronic appliances have. So this is survey-based data. And what you can see here is, in an ideal world, our survey participants would be able to tell all these CO2 levels apart and everything would be on the 45-degree diagonal. What you can see here, that this is not the case, right? So you can see that people are not that good in estimating the carbon footprint of appliances, the blue dots, and also of food, the red dots. And what you can also see that they are even worse in assessing the carbon footprint of food than they are in assessing the carbon footprint of appliances. And last remark, it's also really hard for participants to tell these carbon footprint apart. So when you, for example, look at lamb, beef, which are extremely heavy on carbon footprint, you see that they are assessed to be roughly equal with pork, which actually has quite comparably lower carbon footprint. Now, this is interesting for us as accountants because we like to think about many exchanges as being driven by information that both parties have, and we all know that reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a area where not a lot of work needs to be done, and this means that we wanted to design an information setup that helps people that go to a canteen to actually understand the carbon footprint of their food choices. So to explain what we did in this field experiment, let me give you a simple example here. So what you see here are two food choices that you could have in a typical cafeteria setting. So there's a pizza margherita and there's a beef lasagna. So both roughly equal in terms of nutrition, if you want, but now the question is, well, how do they differ in terms of carbon footprint? Now, we could think about different, let's say, sets of information here. The first would be, just give the carbon CO2 equivalent in terms of kilograms. So then you see the beef lasagna has quite more carbon footprint than, let's say, the pizza margherita. But at the same time, for normal people like us, that wouldn't really make a lot of difference in terms of the numbers per se. So the numbers don't speak to us. An alternative way to represent the same information would be to price it, right? So there are estimates for carbon costs. And if you use the established estimate, for example, by the German Ministry of Environment, then you would reach these numbers here, 26 cents of environmental costs for the pizza margherita and 96 cents of environmental costs for the beef lasagna. So this may be a little bit easier to contextualize for people. And then we thought of another information treatment, and the other information treatment is actually the percent of the daily budget that people should spend on food in terms of carbon emissions. And here you see that the pizza margherita would be roughly equal to 45% of this budget, whereas the beef lasagna would overshoot. 160% of the daily budget would be spent if you eat a beef lasagna. So based on theory, building on accounting budgets, and we predicted for our field experiment that the last treatment, like the treatment based on the daily food budget, should have the strongest effect on consumption and CO2 intake, followed by the Eurocent treatment, and then by the, let's say, neutral treatment or the Beyer treatment, which just looks at the CO2 emissions. Now, we were running this experiment with a large canteen, and we were very happy for the support by this canteen, and we got quite a bit of subjects or participants that actually dined and provided this data for us. And here's what we found. And that was surprising to us, a revision of priors, if you want. We found the money budget, so the money color-coded treatment to be the most successful in reducing CO2. You see that all these treatments essentially reduce the CO2 intake of our canteen goers, but the money color-coded treatment that uses traffic light color coding and the money contextualization that I just showed you, this has the strongest effect of roughly 10%. And you see that this effect is much stronger than the budget color-coded treatment. And for us, this was really interesting and exciting to see. Not only that we can actually, by providing information, change the behavior of canteen goers, but also that the contextualization matters in a way that we were not able to predict. So we really learned something from this field experiment, which of course is a nice thing. We also learned another thing that I would like to mention that was also interesting to us. So we also ran a survey, and this survey we actually ran on with more than 1,000 participants, so quite a bit of a sample also for that one. And in this survey, we first and foremost found the same findings. So our treatments actually reduce the intake of meat and fish dishes, and because of this, also the intake of CO2. But we also found another thing, and this thing might be a little bit discomforting, and maybe we can chat about it later. So we also found that people were marginally less happy with their food choice. So you see here, all these coefficients are negative, and some of them are significant. And if we pool this together, we actually find that people are a little bit less happy with their choice, hinting to something like a cost of this information treatment, because it triggered people to consume less CO2, and this is exactly what this treatment was about. But at the same time, it also had a marginal effect on the assessed happiness, and we are really interested in understanding more whether this is maybe just a real cost of this information treatment, or whether this is just, let's say, an artifact of our design. So with this, I would like to conclude this little presentation. It was exciting for us to run this study. We were extremely lucky to get support by our canteen operator, by the partner that was chiming in. And we are really excited also to present the results here and to talk about them.
Bianca, you've been a very active participant in this project. I'm sure you have something to add to what Joachim has just said.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's of course difficult to squeeze this on in a couple of minutes, but maybe I can add something to the survey also. So Joachim already mentioned that the sample was quite large for a survey, but of course relatively smaller than our total sample of participants. But what we also found, and what was also super interesting, was when we asked them to rank what they usually base their food choices on. Only roughly 10% of the survey participants stated that they usually select food based on the ecological footprint of the food. So even though it's such a small number of such a small sample, we still found these strong effects, and that is very interesting, and also maybe speaks a little bit to this wondering that we still have in the co-author team, whether we found here a rational decision effect or a subconscious effect.
So I have a couple of questions, one stepping back a long way and one digging down in the weeds a little bit. So stepping back, could you speak a little about what accountants can in general do to bring awareness to consumers about the carbon footprint?
Yeah, can you go?
Yeah, okay, I'll start. Thanks. I think one of the main jobs of accounting is to help the recipients, any recipient of information, to take this information, integrate it in the thought processes, and then make an informed decision. And there we can really help as accountants and as the accounting profession, also in the complex setting of measuring and collecting carbon emissions information along the whole production chain. We have the tools to measure it and to standardize it, and then also to find ways to communicate it properly and reliably and accurately so that people can make informed decisions. So I think that's where our profession can come into clearly.
Yeah, and this is also what made us so excited about it, right? So there we have a measurement problem in a sense. Yeah, so this is what Bianca alluded to. So getting these CO2 measures is far from trivial. And then we have a presentation question, which also accounting is very much focused on, right? And so obviously there's a literature on food labeling and also on carbon food labeling, but most of this literature is not really looking at the presentation format, numerical presentation format in detail. And this is not surprising because these little things are actually the stuff that we accountants matter about. So here we can do our little bit. Yeah? And this is why we really enjoyed working on it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the sentiments that you're presenting, in as much as it's certainly the case that accounting is at the heart of sustainability in the longer run. Measurement, all of those things that we're good at. So I'm glad to hear those comments, I must say. Digging down into the experiment itself, you did this field experiment with students in a canteen, a mensa, a refectory, whatever we would call it. How generalizable do you think the results are? What can we learn outside of this experimental setting?
Maybe one quick remark from my side. So I think, first of all, as you indicated, so what we have are young, well-educated participants. And this has, from an econometric standpoint, maybe two effects, right? One is maybe they are more sensitive to CO2 information because they care more about, their carbon footprint. At the same time, they also are more baseline aware, meaning that they already know quite a bit about this. Yeah, so it's one of the topics that they care about. So if you take these two things together, I could say maybe they cancel out and the effect becomes representative. But I think to be fair here, what we learn is that communication is really depending on the receiver that you have in mind. And maybe we can speak to young people in a typical canteen setting, and we would certainly appreciate further work that looks into also other settings, tries to understand how these different, let's say, presentation formats work for different people. I think we should be a little bit careful in saying one size fits all there. This is one thing that we took away from it, at least.
Yeah, maybe I just add one little sentence. Exactly. So what Joachim just said, it's important how the information is presented, and that's exactly what we also took away from it already, right? So we have to tailor it to the audience, and we also already found that even though we knew our audience and we have tailored it to the students in this canteen setting, still the effect varied with the presentation format. So this is definitely interesting to also examine maybe in other settings. Yeah.
I see red, orange, and green dots in your background, Bianca. You didn't mention that symbolism in the experiment. Perhaps you'd like to just talk about it briefly.
Yes, sure. I can do that. So the one slide that Joachim showed that had these pictorials, the leaves in color coding, that is what we used. And this is one of the menu plans from our experiment. This is always there. It's not just for this recording. So we had to color code for one of our tests. We color coded these information leaf-shaped pictorials into green for good, so low carbon footprint, and red for high carbon footprint. And there we also had to already use some discretion, which is maybe another thing that we are good at as accountants, that we have to, with some rational, of course, with some sense to it, we have to use our discretion and our expertise to find the threshold. When do we cut the green off and start with the yellow? And here we did it based on the daily food budget, actually. And then relative to whether when you eat an average portion of this meal, whether you are already almost done with your food budget or not. That's how we calibrated these colors.
Yeah, and one of the interesting side results that we generated is also that we compared these traffic light treatments with a neutral treatment that doesn't use traffic lights. And it seems to have an effect, right? So it helps people to process this complex information. And this is not that surprising, given, if you think about all the other labeling initiatives that you know from your private life, you see that color coding is actually relatively prominent there. So, and as Bianca mentioned, so one of the interesting policy questions is here, well, where is red? Where starts red? Where is it still yellow? And this is something that I think requires a little bit of even, so like a political or a democratic decision. So what is it that we consider to be red and no longer tolerable? And, this is interesting.
So I'd like to change the conversation a little bit. We're coming to the end of the time we have available. It seems that accountants can play a very active role to, I want to use the word nudge, which is a word that is in the literature, I believe, to nudge the world and market participants, the accounting profession, regulators, whatever, to move in a more socially desirable direction. I know you both have some thoughts on this, and maybe we can finish with those thoughts.
Should I start quickly?
Yeah, of course.
So maybe when we think about this question, and we have talked about this a lot in our co-author team, we first need to define what is nudging, right? So is it really pushing the people towards the desirable behavior, and where does it start? So it can already start with the enhancing of information processing, which is also a big topic in the accounting literature when it comes to the information integration of the recipient. So we can, for example, enhance the information acquisition by making it more salient. That was something that we did with the color coding. And we can enhance the information integration by enhancing the understandability. And that's why we tested these different contexts against each other. So there we can already have an impact in nudging.
I agree. And now the big question, I think this is really something where even within the team, we are not completely in agreement, right? So we had really debates about this. So you can think about this as let's say, as a policy objective that is being imposed by the democratic process. So let's say the Paris Agreement is something that people had to vote on, and now this has to be implemented. And you could argue that if accounting can help to reach the Paris Agreement via information design, then that's perfectly fine and within the lines that, let's say, the regulator has set. At the same time, you can think about maybe also alternative ways to reach a certain objective, like, for example, taxes or prices or, even command and control regulation as alternative mechanisms. And I think one thing that we need to think more about, what are the relative strengths and weaknesses of these mechanisms? So when is it that information is actually really helpful? When is it that prices are helpful? And when is it where actually tight command and control regulations are helpful? And here, I think one thing that we as accountants have to be aware of, I think almost always by providing information, we are also subconsciously nudging people into certain directions. We like to, as accountants, we like to think about, rational decision makers that have updated information and because of that make decisions based on their own thinking. I'm not entirely sure that this is how it works in the field. So I think we have to take the responsibility to become aware that by information we also push or nudge people into directions that are not completely intentional on their own regards. And B, we have to also think about, well, what is the role of accounting as, let's say, a trust generating activity? And maybe it's also sometimes good to keep information as neutral as possible and to reach societal objectives maybe with other needs, because if you have a world where people don't trust accountants anymore, I'm not sure whether this is a good world, right? So it's a complex question. It's not easy to answer. So this is why we are also excited to think about it more. And we're not halfway done yet. So it's just a lot of question marks in our mind.
Thanks for those thoughts. Bianca, final comments?
Just to the nudging, I think, we have to emphasize that we're just adding to the debate here. We're not trying to solve it. But final comments, what we can learn from our study, the main point is really that information can help in reducing the carbon footprint, but it's really important how it's presented that matters.
Thank you very much. And thank you for doing this exciting work. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure you did too. Now, in fact, we're going to turn to a discussion among a lot of young people about concern about climate change, sustainability, and so on. And I think the segue from this exciting experiment that younger academics are doing to what the youth are thinking about the future is extremely important. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us, Peter.
Thank you.